Hi, this is Miss Hadi from Olympian High School, and today we're going to use the Traditions and Encounters textbook by Dr. Bentley to look at serfs and manors in post-classical Western Europe. And we need to be able to recognize big changes that are happening. So first of all, we need to remember that Western Europe in the post-classical period was a decentralized political order. And so you had the system of lords and retainers, also sometimes called lords and vassals, and you have these people that over time become political elites, and they're basically able to provide military services, provide for government, because they have the material resources that they need provided for them in terms of food and surplus agricultural goods by what we're going to eventually call the serfs. So they're living off of these peasants, and I'm going to explain what a serf was. So for a long time, when the Roman Empire existed, there were many people that were slaves that worked at agricultural tasks. And what we'll see is after the fall of the Roman Empire, people that worked the land, that were peasants, free peasants, worked side by side with former slaves. And so you have these slaves, former slaves, and peasants that intermarried, and they're doing the same tasks. And so they become sort of like the same class. And the Roman Empire, as you know, on the Western side is going to fall apart. So when that falls apart, and since there isn't a centralized system, since it's mostly decentralized, except for we talked about the Carolingian system, they needed some protection from invaders. We talked about different invading groups like the Magyars, the Muslims, the Vikings. So they needed security. And what they did was they would promise a lord that they would cultivate the land in exchange for land to cultivate, and they would get protection. So they would be protected by the lord and his military, and in exchange they had land to cultivate. And basically this slave and peasant class, as they intermarry, are going to be called a new social class called the serfs. So they're known as serfs. So they're not quite chattel slaves where they're treated exactly like property, but they have restrictions or limitations, and they're not fully free. And this happens right around the 600s, the mid-7th century. Okay, so they have obligations. That means these are things that they have to do, like tasks that they have to do. So sometimes they have to provide labor services, that's work, or payments of rents in kind. So rents in kind means in terms of goods. So maybe they're bringing eggs, or they're brewing beer, or they're bringing cheese. And the men and the women did different tasks that I'd like you to read about to see the difference in gender socially between the labor that they did. And again, the landlords, or the lord, would provide land for them to cultivate, sometimes tools and animals, but they couldn't just move freely. Serfs were restricted, so they had to ask permission if they wanted to go marry someone from a different land, and sometimes they had to pay a fee in order to do that. Okay, so what else happens alongside this new institution of serfdom is the development of a new form of agricultural organization called a manor. So manor is basically like a large estate. So estate isn't just like one house. It's a huge amount of land, it's a parcel of land that has forests in it, has meadows, agricultural land, it has the breweries, the bakeries, all the things, and like basically think of it as like a small self-contained community where the lord is providing protection. He's also taking care of justice. If any of the serfs commit a crime like a murder, they have to investigate, they have to punish. And so it's like a little community, and it sometimes supported like small marketplaces where people could come and trade things. And here you can look at how the lords of the manors maintain mills, bakeries, breweries, wineries, and serfs produce most of the iron goods. It tells you all of this. Sometimes you have small local markets near monasteries supplying the residents of manors with things they couldn't make or manufacture for themselves. So the last thing I want to say is this is going to change in the High Middle Ages. So we need to know that there's a distinction between like the early Middle Ages, which is basically what you would think of as 500 to 1000, or you could think of it as 650 to 1000, and then from 1000 to 1500, or 1000 to 1450, depending on what periodization you're using. That's like a different time period, because Western Europe is going to start to have reintegrate itself into the larger economy that it was basically disconnected from in this time period that we're looking at now, the early Middle Ages. But this is eventually going to lead to some big change in the High Middle Ages. So after the year 1000, some of these craft skills that were developed on manors would help in the economic reintegration of Western Europe with the larger Afro-Eurasian trade networks. And we'll be looking at that in the later High Middle Ages chapters. So I believe chapter 20 is the next one.